everyone, welcome to the Nikki Jensen Show. I am Nikki Jensen. Today we have a fantastic show for you, and it's actually really kind of unusual. My guest, Joshua Shea, is a recovering porn addict. Now, this is something that we don't typically talk about, but I thought it was very interesting that this man is coming out and talking about things that no one is talking about. Actually, he wrote a book called The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About: How I Let My Pornography Addiction Hurt People and Destroy Relationships. That's his book, written in 2018. Now, Joshua Shea is coming out to educate and help other men that are facing the same addictions. So I thought it would be a great idea to interview Joshua, coming out and talking about his addictions, not only with pornography, but with alcohol, and the effects that it had on his wife. And maybe this could help somebody else facing the same realities that Joshua was facing as well in his family. He has a wife and 2 kids, and he walked through hell and back, and now he is recovering and doing quite well in life. Here's Joshua's story. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank you so much for being on the Nikki Jensen Show. I am truly grateful for you stepping out and being a guest. Our topic today is extremely important, and you, brave soul, are one to step out of the light or step away from, the thing that people don't want to talk about and talk about it. And that's pornography. And so you're an ex-pornography addict.
Yeah,
So,
I like to say recovering. I don't know that I'll ever be ex, but
recovering.
Recovering.
Thank you for correcting me. Now, I want to hear your story. I want to hear it from your side of things. How did it transform for you? So tell me from the beginning, when you were even a teenager, perhaps, because you had a 25-year addiction.
Yeah, and it actually goes even further back than that. I'm kind of textbook when it comes to pornography addiction. Patrick Carnes is one of the big wigs in this field, and he's determined with his studies that roughly 80% of porn or sex addicts have had sexual
trauma
abuse upon them. Yeah, sexual abuse upon them. Roughly 90% have had physical abuse, and around 96% have had emotional or mental abuse. I fall into both the sex and emotional abuse categories at the hands of a babysitter when I was very young. I repressed a lot of those memories. Later on, when I was in recovery, untangling a lot of those memories and learning how I created defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms back then somewhat explained a lot of this to me. But anyway, when I was about 12, 13, I saw my first hardcore pornography. It was presented to me in some magazines by an older cousin, and I'll tell you, within the first minute, I knew that I had found something special. It wasn't necessarily that there were naked people on the page or what they were doing, but I had just found something that, for whatever reason, spoke to me, made me feel better, made me feel calm in a way that I had never felt before. And I tell you, the only time I've ever felt that way again, being introduced to something, was about 5 years later, not 5 years later, probably about 3 years later, when I was at a wedding around 15 years old and I got drunk for the first time. This led to another 25 years of alcoholism on top of the pornography addiction. But when people question the legitimacy of pornography addiction, I always say that it did the exact same thing for me in the exact same amount of time. And these two addictions, pornography and alcohol, were with me all the way up until 6 years ago. Anyway,
Mm,
and what I can do is I can trace both of these, especially the pornography addiction, because that's the one that I really had to hide from everybody the most.
yeah.
Is during my life, whether I was in high school or attempting to go to college or getting my career in journalism started, or even around the time I was meeting my wife and starting to have kids. In the good times, I wouldn't use pornography nearly as much, and in the rougher, stressful times, I would use pornography. And it's not really, and a lot of people, ask about, well, what was it you were looking at? And it says, it doesn't really matter what's on the screen. It doesn't really matter what's on the page because you're not using it the same way that a recreational user is using it. While there is, an excitement from the sexual nature of the material, it was for anxiety. It was for
Okay.
stress. It was the same reason that anybody else goes to their addictions, be it drugs, alcohol, gambling, food, whatever it is. Addiction is addiction is addiction, and the same chemistry was going on in my brain. Anyway,
Mm,
when I got to around 33, 34 years old, this is going back to about 2008, 2009, I made the decision to start a magazine in my hometown here in central Maine. There was no lifestyle magazine, dining, the arts, entertainment, all that stuff. So I decided to launch one. And despite the fact it was the worst economy that we'd seen because of the housing crisis, in years and years, it was an overnight success. And it took off right away. And I created a 5-year business plan like you're supposed to, and it was done within 5 months. And while that's a good problem to have, it's still a problem. And I'm not a very good business person, but I was able to hide that for many years. And during that time, I launched a film festival that became one of the biggest in northern New England. I ran for my local government and was a city councilor. So I was very well known in central Maine. Um, but
mm.
this entire time, people might see me have a drink at a social occasion, but when it was just me, just by myself, after all of the different events and social gatherings and museum openings and all that stuff was done, if it was just me late at night by myself doing the one thing I couldn't do, which is just sit in my own company, I was drinking hard and I was using pornography. And in late 2012, early 2013, after a nice 5-year run of the magazine, our revenues started to plateau for a whole bunch of different reasons, but our expenses kept going up. And like I mentioned, I'm not a good business person, and I was having
What was
trouble.
the name of your magazine?
It was called Lewiston Auburn Magazine. It was really, those are the two biggest cities in central Maine. It covered around a 50, 60 mile area in central Maine.
And what
Uh,
was the premise of the magazine, the
uh,
content?
it was lifestyle. It was, here are the hottest new restaurants. Here's what's happening culturally. The shows coming to town.
Got it.
Interviewing the stars that would come in. Just kind of one of those for socially active professionals is what I always kind of deemed the demographic. So anyway, this started to plateau and the expenses kept going up, and I was getting nervous because, well, I'm a decent writer and I'm a decent editor, I'm not a good business person. And in early 2013, I made the absolutely horrible decision, and this is where the whole story kind of takes its turn, to pull myself off of my bipolar medication that I'd been on for around 15 years at that point.
Okay.
I First thing I did was I romanticized the energy and the mania and what all that was like when I was in my early 20s, before I got on the pills. And I somehow rationalized to myself that if I could take myself off of my pills, tap into that energy, that creativity, that mania, maybe I could save my magazine. Well, unfortunately, what happened was within a couple of weeks, the medicine was gone. I was drinking 3 or 4 times a day, and looking at pornography half an hour, 4 or 5 times a week had become every day, multiple times a day, sometimes 1 to 2 hours at a time, depending on if I could get it in there.
Okay.
As the year wore on, like with most addictions, I needed to keep ramping things up. For the first time in my life, I moved from beer to hard stuff, and I was drinking, half a bottle of tequila every night. Um, and I was also, I was no longer satisfied with just watching videos that were on a page. I made the transition over to chat rooms where I would talk to women in one-on-one scenarios. They weren't cam sites like they have these days where you pay the models. These were just regular people, and I devised a way to get them to the woman that I spoke with to take off their clothes, do sexual things, whatever I could convince them to do.
Over
Um,
just their voice, not
Oh,
video.
it was video. It was video as well.
Oh, was.
However, I had figured out a way to bypass my video. So a woman talking to me would think that she was looking at this good-looking 25-year-old guy who looked like he was just typing into his computer.
Mm.
And I always had the sound off because it was 2 in the morning, and I would say I can't wake up my roommates or whatever it was. However, I
And were
manipulate.
you married with children
Yep.
at the
Yep.
time?
I had been married at this point in 2014. Let me see. I'd been married 11 years at the time. And my kids back then, I think my son was in fifth grade. My daughter was eighth grade, I think, at that point.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And, anyway, on March 14th, or sorry, March 20th, 2014, I saw 3 cars pull up to my door along with a van. And you don't have to, be a fan of cop shows of the 70s to know what an unmarked car looks like. And if it's March and you're in Maine and a bunch of guys are wearing golf jackets, they're the police.
Hmm.
So I looked out the window and I was like, what is going on? So I thought somebody had died, or that I had done something with my company that was illegal. I mean, I was racing my mind.
Yeah.
When I went to the door, the officer in the front was carrying a search warrant, and I was able to pick off a couple words quickly and knew why they were there. And they came in and they told me that one of those women that I had talked to, actually from the previous November, had been a teenage girl. And they laid out their case for me and the evidence, and it's not like I could say no, she wasn't.
Yeah. Did they
Just
set you up?
no, no, not at all. I was not thinking about cause and effect. I was not thinking about consequences. And while the the addiction really had worn me down at that point. At the point that I was arrested, I probably hadn't taken a shower in 10 days. I probably hadn't said anything to my wife in 4 or 5 days. I was working only a few hours a day. I was sleeping only a few hours a day. I mean, I was very sick. Theoretically,
Yeah.
I probably should have driven my car into a house before anything else happened. I
You were
was
in
not.
full-blown mania.
Oh, the worst picture of me ever taken was my mugshot. The day that they arrested me, I did not look good because I was very unhealthy. And ironically, the day before I was arrested, my mother was very serious in telling me, "You look like you're going to die." And I made a bunch of excuses because we had a film festival coming up, our fourth or fifth one, and it's just I'm busy. But she actually said, "You look like you're going to die," and she wasn't being funny or ironic about it. Um,
Hmm.
and I also try to drive home the point that while I was sick, while I didn't quite think about consequences or my actions when I was in these chat rooms, I do take full responsibility for what I did. I know that there are 15 and 16-year-old girls who look 25 and 26 and vice versa. And while the addiction and the mania perhaps got the better part of my mind, I'm the one who pulled myself off of my pills. I'm the one who knew I had a mental health condition, and I didn't really care enough about it because the magazine was too important to me, trying to save that company. So
Mhm.
I fully take the blame. I fully take all of the responsibility. It was a heinous, horrible thing that I did. And not just to a teenage girl, but I did this to many women in their 20s and 30s as well. And after that happened, the next day, I went to my lawyer for the first time. I'll tell you, I was arrested. I was brought to the county jail. My wife came and bailed me out. I got in the car, and the first thing I said was, "Listen, I'm not going to fight you. You want a divorce? You've got it. I'm asking way too much of you to stay with me. You want the cars, you want the kids, you want the house. I'm not going to fight you on any of this. Nobody deserves what just happened to them. She said, you've been sick for a very long time, and I've been trying to tell you you're sick for a very long time. All I want to know is, did it involve little kids? And I said, of course it didn't. And she's like, okay, well, we know you've been sick, and we've been trying to tell you. And I didn't get it until the next day. Oh, we tried to go back to my house. There was already a TV news van there, and we had to run around a few times that day to avoid TV news vans because it was a very big story in Maine.
Yeah.
Um, the next day I met my lawyer, and he said to me, are we playing a litigation game or are we playing a sentencing game? And I said, it's sentencing. They have me. I'm not going to try to fight it. His second question was, do you have any drug or alcohol problems? And I said, of course not. And my father, who came to the meeting with me because he was friends with that lawyer, and my wife both kind of chuckled and said, no, he has a big drinking problem. And I said, okay, I'll fine. I'll go to rehab. I'll do 28 days. I'll get my certificate. It'll make the judge happy. And my lawyer said, wait, no. Listen, you may do some jail time on this. You may get some probation on this. You may walk away. We don't know what's going to happen at this point. However, when this is all said and done, there will be the end to the legal ordeal. But do you want to be the same guy? And I just kind of sloughed it off. But after a week in rehab, and about 3 days later, I went off to rehab in California, Palm Springs. And after about a week in that rehab, it dawned on me, oh my goodness, I'm exactly the alcoholic they're talking about. This is totally about me. What was I thinking? Of course I'm an alcoholic. Listen to this. And instead of doing 28 days, I actually did 70 days there.
Well, good
Uh,
for you. I don't
yeah,
think that happens very often.
no, and even more, perhaps even more importantly, my caseworker, I became comfortable enough that I opened up about some of the pornography and sexual stuff. He had me meet with a colleague of his off campus who was a certified sex addiction therapist, and we just began to dig in to that side of things. And thankfully we did, because I had not heard of porn addiction. I thought I was just making dumb decisions when I was drunk.
Yeah.
But he taught me and he showed me that I had a pornography addiction that was even longer than the alcohol addiction. When I came back to Maine, I started working on that hardcore with a therapist, started reading everything I could about it, because being a former journalist, that's kind of my way, is do as
Sure.
much research as possible. And then that following summer in 2015, I went to Texas to an inpatient facility for pornography addiction for about 7 weeks, which was a hugely transformative experience. Hell of a lot of work, but fantastic. And I ended up doing 6 months in jail. While I was in jail, I met a lot of guys who, just through the grace of God, I wasn't where they were in life
Mhm.
demographically. I had great parents. I had a great, support system. And that was really the only difference between us. And I realized that people have a lot of misconceptions about porn addiction. They have a lot of misconceptions about who are porn addicts. And I wrote my first book when I was in jail back in 2016. I've written another. I'm working on two right now. Um,
Do you have those two books with you?
oh, of course I cleaned my desk because my wife loves my workspace and how dirty it is, so I cleaned it. This was my first book. It's called The Addiction Nobody Will Talk About. That
Which I love
is,
that title. It's
yeah,
brilliant. Brilliant.
it's yeah. Thank you. It's about the only thing I've ever named in my life. Everybody else always comes up for titles for my magazines or books, but this one I named myself. This is a memoir. It's available on Amazon. Really
Put
talks
the
about,
links down below.
yeah, really talks about the last 4 or 5 years of my life as I was running that magazine, and how things went up and then they crashed. And my most recent book that was released is this one. It's called He's a Porn Addict, Now What?
Yeah.
I wrote this for partners, because after my first book came out, I thought I'd get a bunch of emails and messages from porn addicts, and I did. But half of the messages I got were from wives and girlfriends, and even mothers or sisters and brothers wanting to know what they could do. And I talked to my wife a little bit about it, and she was like, yeah, there were no resources for me. There were very few for porn addicts. There was even
Yeah.
fewer for the uh, spouses or partners of porn addicts. So I teamed with a licensed marriage and family therapist out of California, And we essentially took the 65 most asked questions of partners in that situation. I answered them from the former addict point of view. He answered them from the professional point of view to try to give a full picture to someone who finds themselves basically in the position my wife was in when this all exploded.
Wow. Okay, so we're going to get into what you're doing now, as a business, because I want to know about that.
Yep.
But really, I want to ask you, how do you think society shapes this addiction? And I don't necessarily want to put a label on it as good or bad. It just is. It
Right.
feels bad. It looks bad to society, but there are also, people that are not people, it's society that makes it look glorious. It's all around us. It's even in Disney movies. So I really want to ask you, how does society play into this role?
Well, sex sells and it's always sold. And pornography has been around as far as we can trace. You go back, you walk into any fine art museum and look at some of the Egyptian vases and pottery and whatnot, and you're going to find some very intense triple X rated stuff on them.
Right.
You can go back to some of the earliest cave paintings we have, and there's depictions of sex on the walls. So, I don't make my mission to fight pornography because I might as well bang my head against a wall.
Mm-hmm.
What I think the big point is since we've had the internet introduced to our lives, and since every child now has the best porn computer ever invented in their pocket, that we need to talk about how this can warp sexuality. We need to talk about how this can be an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, much like cigarettes or drugs, we need to teach the next generation that they need to make smart decisions with it, especially the children. They can
Mm-hmm.
make whatever decisions they want after they're 18, but they need to be armed with the facts. We did not arm the first generation that grew up on the internet with the facts. And right
Yeah,
now, men between the ages of 18 and 30, 32% self-report that they either have a problem with pornography or that they believe they're a pornography addict. That's 1 out of 3 men under 30.
hmm.
They are going to be 40 and they're going to be 50 and they're going to be 60. And if we don't take care of this, there're just going to be more coming behind them.
Hmm.
And that's really what my message is about, is let's talk about the fact that this can be very addictive. And it also, we have to talk about pornography to get to that point. But I also try to share that, it doesn't have to be graphic. It doesn't have to be judgy.
Yeah,
You don't have to talk about anything somebody's specifically looking at. It's an addiction like anything else, and society preys upon our addictions, whether that's sex, whether that's gambling, whether that's food. These are the kinds of
that's right.
things that make money. So why wouldn't we expect porn to be out there? But much like these other things that we are educated on and have to make our own decisions, we should at least have that education surrounding pornography.
I agree. What are the signs of porn addiction?
Well, early on, it's that usually they aren't noticeable in somebody very early on. That's when the person, begins to obsess a little bit about pornography. That's when they may put pornography in front of doing activities with their friends or something else that they enjoyed, playing a musical instrument, watching TV. Porn starts to creep in as a priority.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the real early stages of addiction. The ongoing stage, that's where people are, most of the time, and I was probably there 18, 19 of my years. And that's where it becomes, ultimately a crutch. That's where you understand that you're doing something that isn't right, that isn't healthy, that others would look down upon, that you probably even don't want to do, but you can't stop. It's the only, it is a driving force in your life. you
Yeah.
have you have rituals around it. I mean, back in the day, the sound of the modem starting up was, like a siren's call, because I knew what was coming. After
Mm.
that was, the pornography was coming in through that sound.
It's like the
uh,
dog salivating.
yeah, exactly.
What are the signs for wives? What are the signs, for mothers who,
Well,
ultimately watch this show and they're like, Well, that's exactly my husband,
Yeah, you're going to
and you
see.
get a conversation going into the family.
Yeah, you're going to see the person being withdrawn from activities. They don't want to go to family activities. They don't want to hang out with you, even if it's just to watch TV. They are isolating, even if they're not engaging in their activity or their addiction. They're isolating a lot. They also tend to be very irritable, especially if you bring up what you think the problem might be. If you brought up to me that I think you're a gambling addict. Well, I don't care if that's what you think because I'm not. You bring up that I'm a porn addict, that's going to get a bigger reaction out of me. So that's a real red flag with people.
Yeah.
And ultimately, seeing them get in some trouble in their lives, or is their schoolwork falling behind? Are they, not performing at work like they should be? Do their friends not call to take part in activities like they did before because this
Hmm.
person's been standing them up? It's really, it's about being withdrawn. It's about going into your own world. Usually
Yeah.
with addiction comes depression.
Right.
And the only way to, treat that depression in the addict's mind is to engage in your addiction.
Yeah. So now that you have gone through therapy, now that you have, really worked through this, so what has been the next phase of your life? Even in business or as in getting a job. How does that look for you today?
Well, I am before I did any of this, I had started to recognize that the magazine was falling apart. So I moved over, or I should say back to the world of freelance writing or ghost writing. When my son was very little, I took a few years off from being out in regular working world and built up a bunch of freelance and ghostwriting clients, and that's what I have now. And I make a good living doing a lot of mainly corporate writing, websites, blogs, some books, marketing books. And I try to split that time with the pornography education and speaking about it. Along with, like I said, I've got 2 books written. I'm working on 2 more right now.
Yeah.
I do travel around to libraries and churches, other civic groups, and talk about pornography addiction, a little bit of my story, some of the statistics, and also talk about the fact we need to think about the next generation coming up through. Um, and then I have a advisement arm of what I do as well. What I've learned is that there are a lot of guys and a lot of partners who are scared to death to go to therapy, who are scared to death to open up about this to someone who doesn't understand the position they're in. So I've kind of found this little niche as being this stepping stone between doing nothing and therapy. I kind of look at my job as to push them towards it, but I serve as the first porn addict most of them have ever talked to. And they learned from me pretty fast. Number one, I'm not going to judge them on anything they looked at. I looked at some really depraved stuff along the way, and I understand why they did. I understand why the need to escalate. I get it, and I'm not going to judge them on that. When you don't judge somebody, they feel safe. So what it creates is a safe space. Couple hours of conversations, they learn that they're not alone. They learn that they can, if they're willing to work for it, get through this. They can see that there is an end game of a much better life, despite the fact that I'm not quoted in the newspaper every other day and I'm not on TV anymore, and all this local celebrity stuff that my ego totally bought into,
Mm.
that I thought made me happy. I'm now in the happiest I've ever been, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. I have a great relationship with my wife and kids. I'm proof you can get to the other side. I'm also proof that there is no stereotypical porn addict, because I think most people think of this 19-year-old pimply faced guy in his mom's basement with, never kissed a girl in real life. And that wasn't me. And when I was in rehab, I met mothers and nurses and doctors and lawyers and every type of person you could imagine. So I think that in doing this, and I charge very little to talk to people. It takes time away from my writing, so I need to charge something. I try to be that conduit that, urges them to talk to somebody who has the proper schooling, who has gone through this, who can take them on the full track. But, I try to be that person that demystifies it for them.
Right. Joshua, thank you so much for being on the Nikki Jensen Show and really being that light and the catalyst, and for being, opening up and being so vulnerable. This is such a great topic that no one is talking about, like your book says. No one is talking
Exactly.
about this. And, you are the catalyst, you are the light for this topic. And I know that you're helping so many families out there, so many people get help for this, and really being that person who has shined the light that there is a way to get better, and there's a better life out there if you so seek it. So thank you so much for being on the show. I really do appreciate you and sharing your beautiful story.
Thank you. And I appreciate you giving me the platform. There are a lot of people who don't want to talk about this. And until we're able to say the word pornography out loud, we're not going to be able to say the words pornography addiction. So thank you very
Absolutely.
much. I absolutely appreciate it.
Absolutely.